Welcome you all to this third lecture related to the history of Arabic literature. We'll be talking about different aspects of language and literature during the Abbasid times. We've already seen the prolegomena, the introductory part, taking into account the historical, socio-political, cultural aspects of the Abbasid times in the context of Arabic language and literature. We have also seen the development of poetry and poetics during the Abbasid times. And we have seen how poetry emerged as a primary icon of the cultural identity, the principal representation of the cultural identity, thought identity, the very spirit of the Abbasid times in comparison of the things we have seen in the domain of language, literature, ideology, and cultural milieus, cultural themes developing through ages, pre-Islamic period up to the early Islamic period, passing to the Umayyads. After that, this legacy was passed on to the Abbasids. See, the most prominent thing was that Abbasid culture, Arabic culture represented by Baghdad, the Abbasids in Baghdad, and of course at a later stage, which was very much like symbolism when the Khilafah, the symbolic Khilafah, was shifted in the backdrop of the ruin of Baghdad, destruction of Baghdad. It was shifted to Cairo under the Mamluks. So the culture here was very much cosmopolitan in nature. There were the minglings of races, languages, ethnicities, also religions. Then there was this phenomenon of historical phenomenon of the active dialogue between different cultures, the dialogue that established the direct contact with the other peoples, with the other cultural identities, with other cultures of literatures, wisdom, chiefly the Greeks, the Syriac peoples, the Hellenistic circles, the Persians, and of course the Indians, the Sanskrit legacy, which is represented chiefly by Panchatantra's translation into Arabic via Old Persian or Syriac by Abdullah ibn al-Muqaffa, alongside the literary fragments we have in Alf Layla wa Layla, which traces whose origins would be traced, of course, into the Hazar Afsana of the Persian legacy, apart from being extended to the Indian wisdom, that is, the literatures of the Gatha, the different fables of Indian origin, which were primarily represented by Kalila or Panchatantra. So that was a scientific period, a period marked by scientific spirit, where the domain of knowledge was not limited to the traditional sciences, whether they are the religious sciences or the language sciences, like simple Nahw and Sarf and Balagha, etc., which had seen its primary stage of development during the Umayyad times, again in the backdrop of the minglings, the great interactions taking place on socio-political and religious levels between Arabs and non-Arabs, in the Arabian Peninsula. So here we have philosophy. We had seen philosophy, philosophical literature, poetry in different schools, like political poetry, the ghazal, the love poetry, the panegyrics, the nature prelude, and of course the philosophical poetry and the spiritualist poetry, that is Sufi poetry, we have during the Abbasid times. Philosophical poetry was significant, especially in the backdrop of that interaction between Arabia and India, and of course the Greek and Hellenistic traditions, where we have Abu al-Ala al-Ma'arri composing fine poetic lines on philosophical thought, alongside other poets like Mutanabbi. So the Mutanabbi, who stood as icon of that age, had belonged to this. Apart from the ghazal poetry, that tradition of the Uzrait ghazal we had seen during the Umayyad times, it was carried on, developed by Al-Abbas ibn al-Ahnaf during the Abbasid times, alongside the development of other genre like the pure subjective poetry, as we find in Ibn Rumi's Diwan, alongside many other names we had seen. Now in the domain of prose, we had already seen the development of prose in the Islamic, early Islamic and Umayyad periods, alongside the prose as it is found, or the phenomenon of prose, the scenario related to prose in the pre-Islamic era, where there seems to be the imbalance in terms of quality and quantity. On qualitative and quantitative grounds, we find a sort of imbalance between the progress, between the phenomenon, between the legacy we have in the domain of poetry, compared to prose, due to various reasons. So I have already seen, like the lack of the means of preservation, and the traditional focus on the memory, collective memory, which is known as zakira. So this was replaced, of course, by Islam, because in the history of Arabic language and literature and thought, we find with the advent of Islam that an era is embarked upon, and this era identifies itself with a big transformation, with a fundamental transformation between solely relying upon the oral traditions and moving to the modes of codification, standardization, and the written cultural legacy. So with the advent of Islam, there was a paradigm shift, as we have seen, focusing the shift from the poetics to prose, because the Quran and Hadith and the primary sources of Islam's canonization of Islam were in prose. So there was a paradigm shift. Alongside other things we have seen, like how the institutions brought about by Islam, given birth by Islam, nourished by Islam, developed by Islam, Islamic theology, Islamic society, Islamic polity, Islamic culture, it all revolving around Quran and Hadith, and the personality, the persona of Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, the Sahaba and Tabi'een. All this paved the way for emergence of a number of disciplines like Quran and Hadith and Tafsir and Fiqh and Usul Tafsir and Usul Hadith and Usul Fiqh, etc. later on, resulting in establishment of different schools of theology, of jurisprudence like Ahnaf, Shawafi, Maliki and Hanabila during the Abbasid times. So we find that there was a big paradigm shift. and that was developed like a khutab, al-amsal, al-rasail, correspondence, alongside the uh, compendiums or collections of works uh, which were published at a later stage, but they were of course codified during the Umayyad times, like Kitab Tijan, Fi Muluk Himyar, etc. So we find because of this, there was a big paradigm shift. So here was the focus was shifted from prose to poetry. This happened during the Umayyad times, but with the advent of the Abbasids and expansion of the state on geopolitical and cultural lines, we find that both poetics as well as the prose, the domains of prose, progressed tremendously. And as we have seen, the different thematic aspects of poetry, like philosophical poetry, love poetry, panegyrics, political poetry, poetry related to ideology, debates, etc., alongside spirituality, Sufism, and some experimentations related to the very structure of scansion system, is the structure of the poetic genre. While Arab circles came into contact with the Persian circles, so there were some mixings, of course, language mixings, as we find in the case of Rubai or Khumasi or Sudasi, and especially Mulamma'at. ألا يا أيها الساقي أدر كاسا وناولها كيش خاصان بوت وليفتاد مشكلة, like that we have already seen. So we have and of course at the another side, that is in the Andalusian side of the Abbasid times, not Abbasid Caliphate, because caliphates were different. The empires were different, but the time was the same. In East, it was known as the Abbasid Empire, and in the West, it was known as the Spanish or the Andalusian Empire. But the Umayyads, when just pushed into oblivion in that is Damascus in East, they had found their way. Some of them had found their way, as we find in the case of Abdurrahman ad-Dakhil, Saqar Quraysh, to move to westward and reach Andalusia and establish first the emirate and then an empire. So we find that as the case was with the case of diversity of genre and the linguistic grandeur, the themes, the motifs of poetic deliberations, poetic compositions, resulting into a large number of anthologies, poetic collections of poems with the notable poets like Bashar, Abu al-Atahiya, and Al-Mutanabbi, Abu al-Ala al-Ma'arri, and Asharif al-Radi, Asharif al-Murtadi, among many others, representing all these thoughts, all these trends in poetry. So we find the same thing, rather with a greater clarity and details, representing a plethora of themes, a plethora of schools, a plethora of orientations, which resulted at a later stage into establishment of different schools related to prose itself. So the foremost form of prose we have during the Abbasid times is An-Nasruddini, or the religious prose. Religious prose is represented chiefly by in the noted domains of theology, in relation to the canonics of Islam, that is Quran and Hadith. because canonics of Islam are based on the Quran and Hadith, followed by ijtihad and qiyas as per the norms of usul fiqh. And of course, we'll be having some differences, some details, uh, uh, as these norms were applied practically by different groups or different classes, different madaris al-fiqh, al-madaris al-fikriya, like the Hanafites, the Shafi'ites, the Malikites, the Hanabila, etc., alongside other domains. So this was primarily the extension of the legacy, extension of the religious legacy during the Umayyad times, because religious prose related to the topics of religion, to the themes of religion, representing first by Quran first, then Hadith. You might be adding al over there, Al Quran, Al Hadith, revolving around these primarily two sources of jurisprudence, of Islamic legislation, or anything that is related to the process of forming the codes and the standards. They have to be related methodologically with these two primary sources, followed by, of course, ijtihad and qiyas. So the Quranic text, how to read the Quranic text, how to understand the Quranic text, it actually led to different sciences. The primary was like tafsir, and with tafsir is related usul al-tafsir. Al-tafsir wa usul al-tafsir primarily. And after that, we will finding that al-qira'at is after that related to al-qira'at, how to decide, how to read. And there is one aspect of this theme that is related to history or historiography. So all these are related to al-qira'ah, to al-Quran. The same thing could be applied in regard to hadith. So we'll be having the hadith, the traditions. Then it is usul hadith, usul al-hadith. That is how to read, how to interpret the hadith, alongside the topic that is known as al-isnad, ilm al-isnad, which is also known as ilm al-rijal, and this legislative aspect of Islam then leads to another domain, which is known as al-fiqh, followed by usul al-fiqh. So this aspect is related to the practical representation of theology. But when it comes to interpretation of hadith, of the dogmas, the thought structure, the very vision, the very method which is behind the formation of this ilm al-tawhid and al-aqidah, later on is reflected by many, a number of disciplines taking shape, chiefly ilm al-kalam. That is, the cases of aqidah, when they are to be defended, in case there are some intellectual onslaught, if there are some lines of defense, because on rational or on other grounds, people are saying things about. This aspect of ilm al-kalam is significant on two fronts, because we find that ilm al-kalam was a product of the interaction, the interaction that took place between the Greek philosophy, Greek rationalist philosophy, and the traditional theology and theologians, and posing some serious questions, posing some questions on the rational ground, on the ground of reason, rational thinking, in the relation to the issues of theology, like the very concept of God, Godhead, the concept of prophethood, the rational, the concepts of religion, the dogmas of religion, being scrutinized by the rationalistic philosophers, rationalist thinkers, on the grounds of rationality, while applying the criteria of reason, chiefly borrowing from the canonics or the canon of Aristotle. So this led into the emergence of Ilmul Kalam, or the scholastic philosophy, also known as the Al-Mutakallimun, the knowledge of the Mutakallimin, Ilmul Mutakallimin, Ilmul Kalam, wa Al-Mutakallimin, chiefly Al-Ash'ira, Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari, and Al-Mu'tazila. Al-Ash'ira, Al-Mu'tazila, of course, the primary rationalists. And then within the ambit of Ahlul Sunnah, we have Al-Maturidiyya, Abu Mansur, Al-Imam Abu Mansur Maturidi. So we have these facets. Which are related to the religious domain of scholarship, of authorship, in the backdrop of the intellectual onslaught amid the translation movement we have seen, we have talked about. So the translation movements on the individual as well as institutional levels, we find during the Abbasid times. On the thought level, it had led to establishment of to founding of several disciplines, some of them primarily related to defense of theology, and this is Ilm al-Kalam. So this was related to An-Nasr al-Dini. An-Nasr al-Dini at a later also led to, on the juristic front, led to certain specific domains like al-Mawaris, Ilm al-Mawaris, the laws of inheritance, in Islam. Well, you're finding books written by scholars, by the jurists on this, alongside the books on the canonical aspect of Islam, which are usually known as al-fiqh, like Hidayah by al-Marqinani, Sharh Wiqaya by other, and many other books which have been written during that period, which are known as the Kutub al-Fiqh, belonging to different, all these primary four schools of theology, of jurisprudence: Hanafi, Shafi, Maliki, Hanbali, alongside the Ja'fari fiqh, al-Fiqh al-Ja'fari, also Fiqh al-Mu'tazila, and the fiqh or the juristic schools of independent imams like al-Imam Abu Dawud al-Zahiri and others. In the domain of al-Adabi, We have different genres of adab, different genres of adab will be having, like al-insha. It's also sometimes known as at-tarassul, al-insha wa at-tarassul. And literary writings, al-kitabat al-adabiyya, represented by small or sometimes substantial big writings related to adab, or the literary essays and literary essays, al-kitabat al-adabiyya. Related to this is also al-lughawi wa al-naqdi, that is writings related to the discussion of lexical issues, issues of the words, the loan words, and the laws of ishtiqaq, how, or the formation of words, derivatives, the laws of derivatives, and etymology, that is the study of the origin or the first word or the madda of a language, or the very beginning point of a word in terms of its phonetic identity or the primary form. Because languages of the world, as we have seen, they take very much from, they have been borrowing very much from other languages. So there is a law governing the emergence of languages, that they have entered in different phases of history into an arena of give and take. So there have been lots of borrowings, as well as that is influences being exercised by one language to another. The study of the literary enterprise is represented by an-naqd, or literary criticism. I will be focusing on this in a specific lecture. So here are the primary information, primary discussion about the prose, development of prose. So here we have different types of prose. Even like we'll be having maqamat, we'll be having manamat, we'll be having literary compendiums in prose, we'll be having emergence of criticism represented by a number of schools. So also al-khutab and al-wa'az as facets of prose. Alongside the prose on topics of philosophy, we'll be having emergence of a large number of philosophers like al-Razi, al-Ghazali, Ibn Rushd, Ibn Sina, al-Kindi. Al-Kindi happens to be the first, who was the first philosopher among Arabs in the history of Islam. So these philosophers, when seen in the historical perspectives, we'll be finding that first it was the Greek philosophers' influences of the Greek philosophers via translation, when there were translation of the Greek text, Greek philosophical thinkings in the history of Islam. These translations, which were carried out in Baghdad by individuals as well as by institutions like Baitul Hikmah, paved the way for emergence of the philosophical thought, which at the first time focused on the study of the Greek philosophers and their thought, their philosophizing, their method of philosophizing, the issues of philosophy and the methodology of the philosophical thinking. And at a later stage, they formulated the schools of their own, as we find in cases of Ibn Sina, al-Ghazali, Ibn Rushd, etc. So we have a large number of philosophers, like Imam Ghazali wrote Maqasid al-Falasifa first. Al-Ghazali, in his book, that is Maqasid al-Falasifa, followed by another book, that is Tahafat al-Falasifa. Maqasid al-Falasifa by Imam al-Ghazali focuses on the chief tenets of philosophy, chief doctrines, chief philosophical doctrines, while the Tahafut al-Falasifa is the critical analysis, critical exposition, critical study of the Maqasid al-Falasifa, where he criticized the method of the philosophers and their doctrines, the logical inferences applied in cases of philosophy. He criticized them. And this critic at a later stage was criticized, was subject of criticism, critical analysis by another philosopher, that is Ibn Rushd in Spain, who had written Tahafat al-Tahafa. So it was a critic of this critic. It's also known as annihilation of annihilation or destruction of destruction. That is this destruction written by Al-Ghazali, and its destruction or Naqd or Tahafa written by Ibn Rushd. So two very glaring examples, alongside the example of the foremost philosopher in the history of Islam, namely Ibn Sina. Ibn Sina, Abu Ali Ibn Sina, from Central Asia, who is better known for many books on medicine, at-tib, alongside philosophy. So his Kitab al-Isharat, Kitab al-Isharat wa Tanbihat, and Kitab al-Qanun. Al-Qanun. Al-Qanun is in at-tib, and Kitab al-Tanbihat wal-Isharat, this is in philosophy. So these two primary things we have, alongside his poetry, and chiefly his qasida, which is known as Hamziya. Hamziya. Qasidat Hamziya. This is a poetic qasida, sometimes known as Urjuza. هبت إليك من المحل الأرفع ورقاء ذات تعزز وتمنع. It depicts the estrangement of soul, journey of soul from the ultimate abode of the cosmos. And here this ultimate abode is the ultimate reality. When it transcends to the lower domain of humans, then there are all these sufferings. And after some stay in the material domain of this world, the soul again migrates to the ultimate domain. So this is a philosophical qasida. It actually combines between, it analyzes the questions of ration and reason and intuition, that is the rationalistic lines, the material philosophy, the rationalistic philosophy, and how it is related, how it is to be related to the spiritualistic philosophy, or the philosophy of intuition, which at a later stage becomes related to the theology. And that sort of philosophical exposition of soul is taken over by the Sufis, by the spiritual poets, as we'll finding in cases of Shaykh al-Akbar, Shaykh al-Akbar, Muhyiddin ibn Arabi, Muhyiddin ibn Arabi. In Arabic, of course, we'll be having other names, alongside many names from the Persian poetry and poetic traditions. like Hakim Sana'i, Jalaluddin Ar-Rumi, Fariduddin Al-Attar, and many others. In Arabic, Ibn al-Faris, and before that, of course, the great personality of Al-Hallaj during the Abbasid times. So that sort of the philosophical literature is gets related to these domains of prose. This is followed by al-Qisasi, al-Nasr al-Qisasi, how prose is related in the domain of fiction. So of course there were the qisas, the stories, the anecdotes, the legends before Islam and after Islam. Like in pre-Islamic Arabia, it was qissatu Antar, the qissa of Antar, and after that qissatu Hamza, known as qissatu Hamza al-Bahalwan. They are very prominently known qisas. And before that we have the qissatu Gilgamesh, qissatu Gilgamesh. It's usually known as qissatu Gilgamesh or Gilgamesh. This legacy was carried out by the narrators of history, of fables to the posterity. It was alongside what we find in the religious domain from the qisas, from the stories, like stories of prophets, stories of al-Anbiya, al-Salihin, etc. But in the later stages, like the later Umayyad times and the early Abbasid period, we have this episode of translation, this stage of translation, where we have seen translators, individuals as well as the institutions getting into business of into enterprise of translation from different languages. So among the books which have been translated were the books of the fiction literature. And foremost we have Alf Layla wa Layla, and before that we have Kalila wa Dimna Panchatantra, of course. That paved the way for a specific form of qisas, which is known as al-Maqamat. Adab al-Maqamat. Adab al-Maqamat, it's actually the short stories written by different persons. They could be identified as the origin of, or the primary segments of the stories and literature of the fiction, or the fiction as we have in modern times, represented chiefly by Al-Hariri, Abul Qasim Al-Hariri, and Badi'u Zaman Al-Hamadani. Badi'u Zaman Al-Hamadani. Also Al-Qadi Al-Fadil. Al-Qadi Al-Fadil. So there was this Al-Adab Al-Qisasi alongside Al-Khutab wa Al-Naqd. In that domain, we also have the Adab Al-Munazarat, the debates, the literature of the debates, the prose of the debates taking place between different philosophers, different sections of theology. Al-Ikhwaniyat, the prose related to the correspondences or expositions, questions, deliberations, initiatives taken by individuals in a specific brotherhood alongside official or religious or social correspondence, then of course maqamat, alongside al-uqud, al-wasaya, al-tawqi'at, and al-nasr al-mutarjam, that is the translated prose. So in the domain of translation, there was the focus was on the prose, like whether it is Panchtantra, whether it is the texts related to the Greek culture, the Hellenistic culture, that were translated into Arabic. Primarily, they happened in prose. With this, we'll be coming to an end of this lecture. Thank you.